In oktober dit jaar is het 10 jaar geleden dat First Tuesday werd opgericht. Misschien kunt u het nog herinneren, de netwerksessies op dinsdag. Waarin consultants, investeerders en ondernemers elkaar ontmoeten. Kortstondig een hele grote groei gehad. Daarna is ze investeerder geworden. Ik ga dit voor de rest in het Engels doen, dan kan ze horen wat ik zeg. She's one of the 30 most powerful women in Europe. Which I think is interesting. I'm assuming in business or just in life in general. Which case we should be really nice to her. But the most special thing is that she is a very famous investor. She works at Ariadne Capital, where she is a partner. And Ariadne was one of the first investors, as you probably know, in Skype, which had a nice little exit when eBay overpaid hugely for it and paid over 3 billion and subsequently wrote off 1 billion, but I'm sure Julie doesn't care. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, Julie Meyer.
Thanks very much. Thank you for being here, and given the interesting markets that we're in, I think hopefully some of the themes about entrepreneurship, you'll see that I'm less concerned about who to blame for the kind of crisis and more interested in how to build a growth story. Just one little point on my introduction. Ariadne Capital, my firm, was not an investor in Skype. We worked with them on an advisory basis really early on. So we said that we backed them because we backed them with our time, and 4 of my team actually flipped into the Skype team, but we weren't investors. I just wanted to clarify that. So I entitled my presentation, Follow the Entrepreneur, because I think really at these times, people think of entrepreneurship as kind of a bull market activity, but I actually think that it's the companies that are building their businesses in the downturn that are going to be doing extremely well in 3 to 4 years out. So I'm a big thief of ideas and quotes, and you'll see a couple of my favorite ones throughout this presentation. I think it was Sir John Templeton who said, invest at the point of maximum pessimism, and if we're not there, I think we soon are going to be. So Ariadne Capital, my firm, is very active right now. We have as our founding investor base 50 leading European entrepreneurs, the founders of businesses like Betfair, WorldPay, a number of from semiconductor to internet and so forth. And we're actually busy backing the next generation of entrepreneurs that are building their businesses countercyclically. So I'm going to run you through kind of 2 separate parts to my presentation. The backdrop for entrepreneurship in 2008, some of the key technology, internet, media trends that I see, and hopefully some of them will either resonate with you or they'll challenge your thinking. And then the second piece of it is what I think the context is to being an entrepreneur in Europe today. So starting with the backdrop. I see these as the overall kind of key market trends, the kind of technology and cultural context for entrepreneurship in the year 2008. First of all, the free market of open source. Met Mark Cantor recently, just right behind in the speaker's room there, and he's out with his new book talking about open mesh. Jonathan Schwartz, the CEO of Sun Microsystems, was talking about open source. Sun Microsystems, big proponent of that. And that is increasingly one of the huge trends, which is a backdrop for any entrepreneur today. The move of applications to the cloud, and then what I call the network orientation to business. Voice-powered applications are redefining the ultimate user interface, and the diaspora of talent from emerging markets are going home and cultivating these developing markets. And finally, as will be no surprise to any of you who are building your businesses, the speed of innovation is changing the way companies are built and invested in. So, as Jonathan Schwartz was quoted recently, he said, a quiet revolution is underway, led by the world's most rapidly developing economies with the least to spend and the most to gain. Gartner, one of the leading analyst firms, quotes that by 2012, 90% of the world's companies will be using open source software. The barriers to global trade have never been lower. All of this is good for creativity and so forth, but it's fundamentally changing the software industry. Some of the companies that you will have heard of that have done extremely well are emerging, MySQL, Ubuntu, and then OpenOffice, which was surprising to me, over 100 million users using OpenOffice today. This is the big trend, and it's rapidly affecting the developed world, not just the developing world. Now, I think what's really going on in Web 2.0 is a network orientation to business, and it's much more profound than just the kind of social networking fad. The winners are those firms which are aligning the economics for all of the ecosystem in which they operate. Now, 3 quick examples. One of them, I'll start with the middle one because it's a Dutch firm that you may have heard of based in Amsterdam, Independent IP. And Independent IP are a software asset management firm for the music content space. It's essentially like a LinkedIn application, and they enable any creator of music and any consumer of music to do the kind of many-to-many connections that need to be done by, first of all, digitizing, bringing it all online, preparing the content, and then enabling any transaction to occur. And you say, well, that seems pretty obvious. What's so game-changing about that? But what they do is that they restructure the economics and they give smaller players just as big of an opportunity to capture some of the value of the transaction, whether they're creating or consuming music. Similarly, Monetize, which is a financial services firm in the mobile banking space based out of London. Monetize is not a disruptive proposition at all. It's basically a mobile banking services provider, and they're enabling retail banks to play a role in mobile banking much sooner and much earlier than if they had developed their own proprietary banking systems. So if you have monetized MoneyLink downloaded onto your phone, as 80% of retail bank customers in the UK and US will have now, it will look like any other ATM transaction to the retail bank. So they're just reusing existing infrastructure, and they've basically looked at what the world of interconnected mobile banking needs to look like down the line and enrolled the retail banks into that vision down the line and made it work for the retail banks, the operators, and the consumers. So not disruptive at all, except for it's realigning the ecosystem of mobile banking in this next stage. And I think whether you look at it in any kind of content or services industry, if you look hard enough, these are the kinds of efforts that are underway, where even something last year, the Screen Actors Guild strike and so forth, where writers were saying, well, we're not getting enough of what we're doing. All of this is about re-engineering the business models for certain industries and enabling the creators of content to have more of a stake. So supply chains become supply networks, and many-to-many connections in industry are enabled. Sorry, I have a bit of allergies, excuse me. How many of you have heard of a company called Spinvox? Anyone? Spinvox? A couple. 6 million people are using Spinvox. It's another European success story. It's a company which does basically one thing very well. They do voice to text or voice to content. So if I left you a voicemail message, it would convert to text or to email or to your blog. So it's basically enabling you to communicate by voice, which is the way a lot of people prefer, rather than typing or trying to text, and to speak any kind of communication. So if you want to announce out to your company recent sales results and immediately send one message out to 300 people by speaking a message or speaking a blog, Spinvox enables you to do that. And this is really one of the first speech recognition, voice recognition has been around for a long time. But what Spinvox has done really well, and when the case study is written on them, what they'll go down in history for having done is really 2 things. First of all, it's again an example of getting the economics to work for all of the players in the industry, because it's a mobile data application, so the operators have just grasped onto this. There's 12 operator deployments last year, again over 6 million people using Spinvox, and And the second thing that they've done really well is they had an insight into a new type of consumer behavior early, that people would like to speak rather than just text and to write. And they were able to establish that market demand with 100,000 people using Spinbox. And only then did they take it to the channel, take it to the operators, and to say, how would you like some of this market demand for this application? So they really showed that almost any B2B mobile internet application needs to establish, first of all, some way, some sort of guerrilla marketing way that people are going to adopt that as a new type of behavior on the phone. And then, and only then, can you march it back into your channel, in this case, operators, carriers, which can be notoriously difficult to sell in and sell through. But Spinbox is doing that extremely well. So, just some examples of, at the end there I said, you were busy, so I spoke you a text, or I'm busy, so I wanted to leave you, speak a message, and so forth. It's showing the kind of conversational element, and Spinbox is the leader. There's lots of companies that have started to imitate them and are getting funded and so forth, but they're the leader with 4 languages and have raised over 100 million sterling, 50 million sterling earlier this year. Second to last trend I'll just take you through is a diaspora of talent from the emerging markets going home. And I think certainly in Western Europe and in the States as well, we're used to people coming from overseas, kind of getting educated, building companies. And what we're seeing increasingly is those people are less interested in kind of making their fortunes, building their companies here, and they want to go back to wherever back is and build them. But what that's doing is that it's creating highly educated entrepreneurial teams of people which maybe have done their first startup in Silicon Valley or their first startup in Amsterdam or London, but are much more interested in going back to Vietnam or India or Iran, wherever it might be, and developing those parts of the world. And what that means is that it's in a real way, it's demonstrating how flat the world is today. 10 years ago, and I'm thinking kind of, next month the presenter introduced me, said that, mentioned First Tuesday, which was a networking event that I founded 10 years ago. It's a 10-year anniversary next month rather. 10 years ago, a lot of the internet businesses that were founded in Europe, we kind of worried about the competition in other parts of Europe. If you're setting up a business today, you're worried about the people who have some sort of cost or market size advantage, which could be on the other side of the planet. And your competition can be just as fierce, but not as close. So just a couple of stats. Just recently, China outpaced the US in terms of number of internet users. More than 29% of those are actually connecting to the internet using their mobile phone. 40% of all Silicon Valley startups actually have somebody of Asian descent behind them. And again, increasingly, those entrepreneurs are going back to India because the growth opportunities there are much greater. So to sum up this part of the presentation, the speed of innovation is changing the way companies are built and invested in. 10 years ago, Google just was founded, 1998. We celebrated a 10-year anniversary just the other week. Only 4 years as a public company, and that's profoundly changed the dynamics. Any company that's setting itself up, whereas it used to be kind of like, well, what's Microsoft doing in your space? Now you ask, well, how are you going to compete, or what are the dynamics of Google and what they're doing in their space, because they have their tentacles into so many different parts of the market. As a result, companies are taking less capital to achieve milestones. The exits are earlier, and the capital is being used to achieve very specific de-risking milestones along the way to exit. And the role of a startup is to have some sort of insights into consumer behavior, even if it ends up being a kind of B2B proposition, but again, to establish that the entrepreneur has understood some sort of insight in the consumer behavior, figure out how to tax it with the business model, and then figure out what the channels to market are and the distribution in order to achieve scale. So Now I'd like to just switch gears to, again, a brief history of entrepreneurship in Europe. Europe's always had its backers, its artists, its adventurers, and mavericks. And I think the difference between then and now, and I'll take you through a couple of episodes of then, is just that the world was kind of inherently unfair. If you go back 1,000 years or even 400, we didn't have these kind of notions of let's try to engineer fairness. And I think because when you work in a startup and you see the kind of basically Darwinian nature of, you know, companies that make it and you think, they were lucky, other companies that are extremely talented and don't make it, and so forth, you see that you really can't engineer fairness, and nowhere more than in the startup scene do you really fully see that. So the Medici family was, as you know, a powerful Florentine family that at one point was known to be the most powerful family in all of Europe. And they were great backers of the artists and the great philosophers, humanitarians, and artists of the time. I didn't know until recently that some of the concrete advances that people who worked within their ecosystem of, again, the art and architecture of its. Christopher Columbus and Queen Isabella. When I looked into this story, I was fascinated because it read like a case study right out of some entrepreneur trying to get funding from a venture capital firm. First of all, the Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, when they first understood what Christopher Columbus wanted to do, they were highly skeptical. It was only the reason why they decided to back him was to keep him from going to the competition. So they basically bought him off, put him on a stipend, and cut him a deal. And the second part of the text there shows that the contract that they put in place was basically, you go anywhere in the world, and we're going to take, we'll give you back from your big titles, you can call yourself whatever you want, and a piece of the spoils and so forth. But it was their way of basically controlling and capturing some of the reward from the risk that Columbus was taking. So I started when I set up Ariadne Capital in December 2000. I thought a lot about, because at that time, if you recall, December 2000, the market was going down. It was no longer the kind of go-go days of late 99, early 2000. And I thought a lot about what was going on in the market. And there are some parallels to what we're experiencing now. And there were a lot of people that still said, well, you know, there aren't the high quality of entrepreneurs across Europe. And it's for that reason that European venture capital has never done well as an asset class. And I kind of heard that from a lot of people as I was setting up Ariadne Capital. I thought, God, that just doesn't compute. It's not my experience. Running around Europe with First Tuesday, meeting a lot of entrepreneurs that would come to these various grassroots networking events. And I finally came to the conclusion, and it became kind of my hypothesis that I've been trying to prove or disprove over the past decade, is that entrepreneurs are not the problem. We have great entrepreneurs. Some of these are my... Basically, here we go. I don't know, it just keeps on going in and out. I'm fine. I'm good if it just stays on. Okay. I'd rather not do the hand mic. I'd rather just kind of talk. Yeah. Good. Good, we'll just go. To the conclusion that entrepreneurs are not the problem, that Europe has great entrepreneurs, it always has. I work with many of them. I try to meet as many as I can. What I came to the conclusion is that actually the financing of entrepreneurship has not been world class. And I think that's the opportunity, and that's why I decided to set up Ariadne Capital, is because I thought that's actually the piece that's broken, if you will, the piece that could get better, is that the ambitions, the intelligence, the hard work, the energy, the insight into market opportunities is just as profound in any European country. In America, it's the side. So, and the other kind of corollary to that is that although we enjoy what I call the richest poor people, and it was actually Martin Varsavsky who said that first, that's one of the very good things about living in Europe. That conversely to that, we have fewer global leaders that have started from nothing and inside of a short period of time have built businesses with billions of pounds of revenue that go on to dominate their category. And I think you can't help but be in the financing of entrepreneurship camp or category without thinking long and hard about how you work to basically improve that. Because, again, if you think we've got great entrepreneurs, if you want to improve of entrepreneurship, sure, you want to make a return. I think overall the game change is to measure yourself by, are we creating global leaders that dominate their category? So the kind of pessimistic is to say, actually, I think there's been a bit of premeditated sabotage of this to kind of not, or to break the ambitions of entrepreneurship, and that's what the rest of this presentation is going to deal with. So what's the problem? Well, I think there's a lack of accountability, and certainly if you've been paying attention to the news the past couple of days, you've seen it in kind of vivid technicolor detail in the banking sector. But I think it goes more profound than that, is that there's a lack of accountability with the people who are governing basically in the state in terms of the use of our taxpayer money, in terms of the taxing on capital gains. I personally find it amazing that the EU Commission's financial accounts have failed to be signed off ever. And it's not difficult to connect the dots between the overreaching involvement of the state in our lives and what the effect of, I think, weakening the entrepreneurial spirit. So is there a problem? I think it is, and I think it has a kind of, the name I would give it would be feudalism. I would say big state, big government creates dependency and weakens individuals, and there's this inverse correlation. Unfortunately, you can't have. So feudalism can't coexist without meritocracy and freedom. And when I say feudalism, by the way, I'm just talking about the role of the state. I'm not talking about anything having to do with royalty. I'm talking about the idea that of ceding your kind of sovereignty to say more or less government's going to be in the driver's seat rather than business and entrepreneurs. So I think building a growth story for Europe means taking individual risks and actions, and I think that rewards are tied to those risks. And I think probably this group, it's preaching a bit to the choir, because this group are people who care and are all about taking risks and rewards. But the real message then needs to go to basically reaching out and saying, if we're creating, by definition, we should be in the driver's seat. Excuse me. So, a couple of conclusions. I think government needs to understand that it's the servant of the people, and European entrepreneurs are driving the growth study. Europeans need to understand that you can't engineer fairness. I think it's nice to try to, but I think it's fundamentally impossible to do. And I think really all you can do is seize choice. What you decide to do with your life, if you decide to risk it and to build a business and you feel compelled to bring something to life. But some of us choose to build and create businesses and to be a net contributor to the system. And others are just intent on taking out of the system. And that fundamentally is a dynamic that I think needs to be reworked and to be part of a public debate, is that entrepreneurs are all about creating new structures, contributing to the next system and growth wave. And there's huge risk involved with that. Entrepreneurs don't live balanced lives. They decide that they're going to put it all on the line to create both wealth for themselves, but also wealth for society. And overall, that drives a growth story that all of society benefits from. So what's the world of the entrepreneur like? Well, a couple of key people here. Nick Ogden, who's one of my favorite entrepreneurs, who founded WorldPay. And this WorldPay has been a little bit eclipsed now by some of the other standards in the financial services sector. But if you remember, WorldPay was a very dominant brand in the payment space and kind of Internet 1.0. And I asked Nick, what are you most proud of as an entrepreneur? And he said, well, you know, probably, Julie, never missing payroll. And I said, no, seriously, you know what? You know, of all of the deals, of all of the things that you accomplished with WorldPay. And he says, no, I'm serious. We never missed payroll. And I'm really proud of that fact. I thought, gosh, that really sums it all up. Because on the one hand, it's all about establishing brands and standards, changing the world. And on the other hand, the thing that this man is most proud of is that he never let his people down. And I thought, that's taking accountability. So, I think entrepreneurship is not for the faint-hearted. It's for people who are taking total accountability of their life and their family, the good, the bad, and the ugly, as I always say. And Candace Johnson, again, another one of my favorite entrepreneurs, always says, she's the founder, one of the key people behind SES Astra and SES Global. She says, never give up, never accept no, and never go away, even when they want you to. So the good news is that economics is trumping politics around the globe. And this groundswell of what I call mass entrepreneurship and individual capitalism is just unstoppable. It's the force of the 21st century. And even if you get, certainly in London where I came from this morning, it's a widely held view. It's not just a Julie Meyer view. But the government in power is just coming unstuck completely in front of everybody's eyes in the midst of the biggest financial crisis that the UK and the world has seen in the past year. It's a deeply uncomfortable place to be. And yet, you've got this opposite trend, which is this triple play of internet entrepreneurship and individual capitalism, which is creating huge opportunities. Some of it at the kind of micro business level, where people are just having their own kind of consultancy or kind of portfolio career. They do something on the side and so forth. But they're leaving the so-called safety of the corporate environment and going solo. In addition to, more people are becoming entrepreneurs and creating big businesses. And certainly we see kind of 10 years into the commercial internet in London, people that were kind of on training wheels 10 years ago, I suppose I was too, a lot of those internet businesses didn't achieve. Maybe they were the living dead, maybe they failed, maybe they were successful and got acquired. But those same entrepreneurs have gone on to set up and very successful businesses in the downturn that are now thriving. I think of Toby Rowland, for example, with King.com. His first business, ClickMango, went under, but King.com has done phenomenally well. One of my favorite quotes is by Iqbal Kadir, one of the founders of the Grameen Bank, and he says so well, capitalism was about empowered authority, which didn't necessarily activate the citizenry. The internet stands that on its head and shifts the power to the individual, making individual the force for the 21st century. So I say, in the midst of all this doom and gloom, actually it's very simple. Just follow the entrepreneur. He or she has the market insight. The value creator is the hero. In mid-August in London, I opened the paper one Sunday morning, and we've had our share of retail bank problems in the UK. And there was a full-page article on a group of entrepreneurs setting up Metro Bank. Metro Bank is raising 100 million sterling to set up a new retail bank in the UK. And I just laughed. I thought, this is unbelievable. But leave it to the entrepreneur. Some guy in the midst of the worst retail banking crisis is going to say, I can do it better, and go find the money from somebody. And I guarantee you, whether it's Metro Bank or something, in the midst of all of this banking crisis, there's going to be new sprouts and new companies that are going to be emerging on the backside of this. So I'm going to ask you to indulge me This is actually from Theodore Roosevelt, who, if you don't know, was an American president, much quoted in these times for his economic views. And he said, quote, "It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbled or how the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes short again and again, who knows the great enthusiasm, the great venture, and spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best, in the end, knows the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat." Now, I think that's wonderful. I think that could be the mantra of just about any entrepreneur that I know. Basically, yeah, it might go incredibly well, but there's no guarantee of it. But these are people who feel unbelievably compelled to be in the arena, bringing something new to life. So what do entrepreneurs do inside of companies? Insight into how particular industries are developing. They're in the eye of the storm, dealing every day. So think differently. They see things that others don't, and they feel compelled to make stuff happen. Often simply because something they... Sure. Then I won't see my presentation. Okay. Thanks very much. Sorry. So anyway, sometimes that blind faith leads to catastrophe, but more frequently it leads to big step change in the way that industries function. So in conclusion, a couple of final quotes. The best entrepreneurs in the world that I've worked with are people who just fundamentally don't play small. And I found this quote, and originally it was attributed to Nelson Mandela until somebody came up after talk like this and said, you know, you realize that you're quoting Nelson Mandela, but it's not. It's a woman by the name of Marianne Williamson who apparently worked with him. And she said, "It is our light, not our darkness." Enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel intimidated around you. And as we let our own light shine, as we are liberated and unconsciously give other people permission to do the same, we're liberated from our own fear and presence, and our presence automatically liberates others. So with a final point, as that great patriot Thomas Paine said, we have the power within ourselves to build the world anew. And I think financial catastrophe and so forth, I think it's going to be, as I said in the beginning, the entrepreneurs who are going to lead us out of this crisis. Thank you very much. Sorry for the sound problems, the eye problems. You've been a great audience. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm okay, it's just my eye. Go.
All right. Well, thanks, Julie Meyer, under difficult circumstances.
Okay, good.
Okay, thank you. We're going to conclude with the last keynote, but before we do that, ga ik heel even kijken hoe het geluid is voor de volgende, anders heeft het weinig zin, denk ik. Momentje.
É melhor ser alegre que ser triste. Alegria é a melhor coisa que existe. É assim como a luz no coração. Mas pra fazer um samba com beleza é preciso um bocado de tristeza. é preciso bocado de tristeza. Se não se faz um samba, não. Fazer samba não é contar piada. E quem faz samba assim não é de nada. O bom samba é uma forma de oração.